Meet Reid Lance Rosenthal, rancher, #1 best-selling award-winning author, and unabashedly, unapologetically on the right side of the outstanding issues of our generation. But don't try to fence him in. Sometimes his positions will surprise you, because Reid is definitely his own man, with his own opinions. You might love him, you might hate him, but you won't be able to stop listening. Step over to the right side with Reid.
This is Reid Lance Rosenthal, broadcasting to you from KGAB AM 650 Cheyenne and the Intermountain Network of the Town Square radio stations, and KFEZ, Easy, Colorado Springs, Southern Colorado, Northern New Mexico, and the Monster Station, 780 AM Denver. Welcome, Rocky Mountains, from Montana to New Mexico and Nebraska to Utah. Got a special treat for you today. I've really been looking forward to this interview. We have Dr. Jerome Corsi on with us. He has written 5 New York Times best-selling books, several of them #1 New York Times best-selling books. He has been a thorn in the side of the Obama administration since 2008, perhaps prior. You know he's doing something right when he's sniped at by the Huffington Post and continuously denigrated by Media Matters, George Soros' outfit, and also, slammed by other groups, including the New York Times, that very conservative paper, and DemocraticHub.com, another kind of interesting little .com that's out there promoting leftist ideas. And we're going to be talking to Jerry today about Obama and his book, The Obama Nation, and whether or not this is intentional or whether it's just a mistake and inexperience and his heart's in the right place. And we're going to be talking to Jerry also about Iran and North Korea and why, as you've heard on this show in previous broadcasts, I think that Barack Obama would actually like to see Iran get the bomb. And last, we're going to be tying it all together because Jerry is out with a new book. It's going to be coming out here very shortly. Jerry, correct me if I'm wrong.
It's just now I'm hitting it. This is the first week.
Perfect. So it's just coming out this week, folks, and I'm going to let Jerry tell you a little bit about it here during the course of the show. You can get it on all the major outlets, obviously. But this is about the fundamental attack on American values, particularly faith and the First Amendment, and how they're using the attack, and I've talked about this in previous shows, which you can listen to in the archives. These people cannot win unless they successfully tear down the pillars of American society, which is faith, family, and the Constitution. And the Constitution is dependent upon the previous two. So without further ado, Jerry, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Reid. It's great to join you.
You betcha. And an honor to have you on, I might add. Let me give you guys a little background. Jerry has a PhD from Harvard. I think it was 1972-ish.
Correct.
And he is a writer and an investigative reporter for WorldNet Daily, which is quite the publication. You folks should subscribe to it if you do not. And he has really written some great stuff. I will tell you, Jerry, I don't agree with all of it, but the topics that we're talking about today, I agree with it completely. By the way, folks, as an interesting sidelight, we'll get into it, I'm sure, in the course of the Obama Nation book discussion. He also got booted out of Kenya while he was over there doing research.
Yeah,
I chuckled at that, Jerry. I wonder who told Kenya to boot you out.
Yeah, I wonder too. It wasn't too much fun when it happened, but it was in retrospect. Of course, it was top-level headlines on Drudge for a couple of days, and it was a big deal when it happened. It was during the campaign and the run-up to the 2008 presidential election.
Yeah, and I noticed that you worried the Obama, methinks, as Shakespeare would say, they protest too much. So instead of simply saying, the guy's a kook, they actually went to the pain to draft a 40-page response memo to your book, Obama Nation.
Right.
I mean,
in fact,
amazing.
It was very poorly done. It was easily answered. If anyone bothered to even read their response, I think they call it Unfit for Publication, based, a play on my Unfit for Command, which I co-authored with John O'Neill on John Kerry, the Swiftboat book.
Right.
And the response to abomination was really pretty amateurish and easily answered. It's just that the media plays this game. As soon as Obama answers anything, the media checks off the box and says, "Oh, he answered that."
It's been rebutted.
The quality of the answer.
It's been rebutted.
Yeah, it's been rebutted.
That's been debunked.
It's been debunked. So they say it's been debunked.
Exactly.
It's the game the leftist media plays.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's the game they've been playing now since this guy came on the scene. But putting that aside, your abomination book. First of all, your book on Kerry, Swift Boats, the Unfit for Command book, which sold I think 1.2 or 1.3 million copies. That's pretty damn impressive. And I say that as a #1 best-selling author myself.
Right.
I think that book made a great difference in that campaign, and I want to commend you for writing it. Of course, it was also quote unquote debunked.
Right. Well, yes. And they say it was filled with lies and all the usual things they say.
Well, one of the great things I got was it was debunked by the Department of Defense official records. Oh,
right.
I thought the whole problem here is that you can't trust the Department of Defense official records. Anyway,
so many things that were handled in a very. The left declares itself a victor. That's the basic summary of that. Without any contest or any standard of contest, just because they've said something, you're refuted.
Yes, exactly. You're refuted. It's now debunked. We win.
Right.
So let's talk about abomination, because this is a great lead into this show, particularly where we're going to wind up with it. Tell me whether you think what Mr. Obama is doing is intentional, a mistake, inexperience, or his heart's just in the right place and he's misguided.
Oh, I think everything Obama does is calculated and on purpose. I think Obama, from the very beginning, said he intended to transform America. And as I pointed out, his background was as a extreme leftist, even a communist. Was raised that way. Frank Marshall Davis, his mentor, and Frank Marshall Davis, at one point a card-carrying communist who came out of Chicago, a poet and journalist, going back to the 1930s, who shows up in Hawaii and ends up being the mentor of young Barack Obama while he's going to high school. And, this influence of Frank Marshall Davis clearly was influential in molding where Obama's thinking went. But Obama, I think, was surrounded by leftists from the time he was born. His mother was a leftist. He describes her as a hippie who thought all religions were just wonderful and kumbaya. But beyond that, she worked for the Ford Foundation and was off doing microfinance in Indonesia in the 1970s when microfinance was just getting going. Very leftist activity, very leftist activist, and also not just a nobody hippie. She was very well known.
And so let me ask a question. I've interviewed, and folks, you can go back in the archives, just click the interview tab on the left side and it'll come up. Paul Kenger did a great book, and I've interviewed him, terrific interview, called The Communist. And this is about Frank Marshall Davis' involvement with Obama and with Valerie Jarrett and with David Axelrod, the exact troika that's in the White House right now.
Correct.
So you guys should listen to that interview because it will give you lots of substance behind this brief discussion that I'm having here with Jerry. Jerry, so he was trained in all this stuff, but specifically right now, number one, he's running up debt like crazy. In fact, my opinion, and we'll see if yours is different, is that he takes every opportunity he can to spend money. He wants to spend money.
Wants the debt to bankrupt the United States. I mean, it's the whole approach from when he was trained at Columbia was to spend to the point where the capitalist system broke. And
which is Cloward and Piven.
It's the Cloward-Piven theory. Two sociologists, and I've written about that. I've written a little e-book on the Cloward and Piven theory. These two sociologists, and they bankrupt New York City in the 1970s by using these techniques to overload the welfare rolls with people who the city could never pay for. And it was done intentionally. And I think Barack Obama's on the exact same path with the federal budget right now. He knows we're overspending. He knows that, increasing $6 trillion, about to be $7 trillion, the national debt from $10 trillion when he took over in 2008 is a break-the-bank type of move.
Well, not only that, the new budget he just came out with, number one, never balances, and number two, even with $1 trillion in new taxes on the middle class, those people who won't pay one more dime on the middle class, we wind up with about a $23 trillion deficit, or should we say primary national debt, when he leaves office.
Well, there's no intention ever to reduce the debt, and the debt, if the debt collapses the nation, then Obama feels Cloward-Piven theory, it will just transform into a socialist system and it'll be for everybody's good. You need a crisis. Remember Rahm Emanuel saying, let no crisis go to waste? Well, it's part of the entire communist system. Create a crisis and then manage it to your benefit to get changes people would never otherwise make.
And I think Cloward and Piven did a paper on that called Orchestration of Crisis also.
Yes, they did. And it was the same whole, this is a leftist technique to engineer a society in a direction, far leftist direction, the society otherwise would never move in.
And, they do it step by step, right? I've talked to you audience, about the nudge idea in Cass Sunstein's book, where you nudge things along, people are asleep at the switch, and suddenly you got them.
Well, and they do it in all kinds of instances. We can go through I write about it in my new book, the whole homosexual agenda, which was engineered going back into the 70s to be a public relations campaign. And I even cite the works which did it. I mean, the books written where the homosexuals said they were going to do an agenda to desensitize America, and they have done it. And it's a conscious plan. It's a step-by-step process of producing change, and the left never stops on it. I'll give you the name of the book here in a minute. It was After the Ball, How America Will Conquer Its Fear and Hatred of Gays in the 1990s. It was written by activist Marshall Kirk and Hunter Madsen, and they talked about a propaganda campaign that goes step by step to desensitize mainstream culture about gays, showing compassionate gays, communicating, and make gays look good. These two men just love each other, these two kittens just love each other. You're going to separate these two kittens? What are you, heartless? Then we have Grace and Will on television, and the whole issue is to make gays look relaxed, low-key, but matter-of-fact, just the kind of person you'd like to hang out with without ever being upfront about what's involved sexually.
And in a way, that's an oblique attack, which we're going to be talking about toward the end of the show, on faith and religion.
Yes, it is.
It's all part of kind of the same. They come at it from many different angles, but all those lines kind of converge on a target.
Agenda. The stealth agenda. What the left is appearing to do is not what they're doing. I've cited repeatedly, even in Abomination, I refer to it, how you've got a agenda. I think in some of the books that were written in the 1950s, which I go back to a lot, Cleon Skoussen's book, The Naked Communist, which I think was a brilliant book in 1958, which exposed how the communists had decided, it was the era of the McCarthy protests, they decided to go underground, that they were not going to be communists with a capital C anymore. They were going to be Democrats with a little d, and get the Democratic Party to adopt their proposals as a liberal agenda.
I think Van Jones said it just a few years ago, right? Drop the radical pose to achieve the radical end.
Precisely. I mean, and then their agenda was, control the schools, use them as transmission for socialism and current communist propaganda, soften the curriculum, get control of the Teachers Association, put the party line in textbooks, eliminate all laws governing obscenity by calling them censorship, break down cultural standards of morality by promoting pornography and obscenity in books, magazines, motion pictures, radio, TV.
And sex ed for fourth graders.
Yeah, exactly. I discredit the Bible by saying it's an old book, it's no longer adequate for today's times. Discredit the Founding Fathers. They're just aristocrats who were selfish and had no concern for the common man.
Well, they were old white guy slavers.
Old white guy slavers. Encourage promiscuity and easy divorce. Emphasize the need to raise children away from the negative influence of parents. I mean, all these agendas, which were the original communist agenda.
It's amazing you bring up that last point, because in my last two shows, particularly the last show, for folks who haven't heard it, you can hear it on the archives on therightsideradio.com. I have a whole segment within that show on education and the not-so-coincidental discussions by, number one, within 1 week, Joe Biden talking about a new world order and equal opportunity for children. And then that gal on NBC, I have a mental block against her name, talking about how the children belong to the collective and not to the parents.
Right.
And then, we have Hillary Clinton's book, All in the Village, where the village raises the kids. And then finally, we have Barack Obama in that same week coming out talking about a new national program for investment in our youth. We're going to make sure that all 4-year-olds attend public, national, federal schools so that they get the proper preschool. And, it's great for you parents because you're going to save all this preschool money.
Well, and also, the whole point, which is coming around to, is that, the evangelicals are really the new terrorists, and we don't want the evangelicals, collectivists, socialists, leftists, communists don't want evangelicals filling those kids' heads with all these negative, stupid ideas of God.
Which ties right in with the Department of Homeland Security reports over the last several months, also which was in my last two shows. The number one terrorists are veterans, evangelicals, pro-lifers, and one or two others in the same category, and they are actually more dangerous than Al-Qaeda.
And by the way, we better not trust these people with guns. That's why we better have background checks so that we can make sure that if you're a veteran returning and you've got post-traumatic stress syndrome, you won't get a gun. If you're an evangelical Christian, well, you sure don't get a gun because you're believing in the afterlife and wanting to send people there.
Yes. Yeah, once again, folks, this all ties in. This staccato, this continual rumble of things that come at us from all sides, it's not an accident. It's not happen chance. It's on purpose. It's diversion, distraction, but it's all kind of, shall we say, laser beams focused at the same target, which in the end is the Constitution and the basic values of this country. Just out of curiosity, while we're on that subject, Jerry, what else are they doing in education? You went through a litany, but I know that there's, it's even down to controlling textbooks and some other things.
Right, rewriting textbooks. You don't teach any American history anymore, except you teach it from a leftist point of view. You basically we were the imperialists, these world wars, we fought to expand our economic dominance over the world. We introduced slavery. Forget about, the United States also abolished slavery or any of those issues. We oppressed the blacks. We freed the blacks and then oppressed them. It's a constant.
We stole the land from Mexico in 1848.
Stole the land are just a bunch of, European renegades who are brought a colonial imperialistic idea into the New World and enslaved everybody here once we got here.
Folks, also in the archives is my interview of Dinesh D'Souza, and he talks at length about this concept of imperialism, why Obama hates the fact that he considers America to be the big imperialist and Israel to be the small imperialist, which will tie into kind of this next segment that we're going to segue into, which is international affairs.
Yeah, before we go, I just want to make a couple points.
Absolutely.
You can see it in Obama is not going to attend Thatcher's funeral.
Unbelievable.
Because they're Europe, England is a great colonialist and imperialist in Africa and Kenya, and so Thatcher is rejected, and she's also a conservative, so she's rejected. Everything I predicted when I wrote Abomination, that we would end up a more racially divided nation, a poorer nation, that there would be redistribution of income, that Obama would campaign on themes of class warfare. His entire re-election campaign was a warmed over, a glossed over communist theme. The rich having their fair share. This is all Saul Alinsky rhetoric. I also wrote a little e-book on that. The fair share is the communist term for anyone who has gained anything because you didn't build that. You gained that at unfair advantage, stealing from someone else whose sweat and effort went into building your business. And so therefore, social justice, we have a right to redistribute that in order to redress the error of your ways taking advantage of the workers. This is communist thinking 101, and Barack Obama, every speech pounded the rich paying their fair share of the taxes. Well, it's a completely inappropriate idea, and it doesn't work. You confiscated the wealth of the rich. Half the country today doesn't pay income taxes.
Yes, if you want to have a fair share, everybody should have skin in the game.
Precisely. It was not a fair system to begin with. It was a progressive tax system. And always, and especially today, the top percentages are paying the lion's share of the taxes. Now, you can't, how high, once you get it any higher than it is, or as high as Obama would like it, confiscatory levels, well, now you're approaching what they do in Cyprus. You just go steal the bank accounts, you take the land, go to Argentina, you'll see the full evolution of a socialist system, confiscating the retirement accounts, changing the currency, wiping out everybody's wealth after they've confiscated it.
And Argentina was a very prosperous, very successful country up to the 1950s when that process began there.
Precisely. We're going down the same path, and what disturbs me, why I've been writing an Abomination, and the others, is that people today are not sufficiently educated to recognize this is communist rhetoric. It's communist rhetoric in the guise of being progressive, liberal, democratic.
Yes, everything has a cloak.
It's all positioned so it appears to be just social welfare state, not social justice under a socialist or communist idea. But it amounts to the same thing.
Well, the left are masters at finding clever little emotionally charged catchwords to mask and cloak what the real message is.
It's never pointed out that economically no socialist system has ever succeeded. Communism has produced nothing but, millions of deaths, economics that are wildly in favor of the few who are at the top. Don't think Obama is going to be disadvantaged or discomforted, or any of the people supporting Obama.
Well, we can see that with his concerts and golf games.
Well,
during the sequester, I might add.
And also with, the way the solar grants are handed out and all the money that's given out in the government, how it's distributed to friends and relatives. I mean, that's typically in communist systems. And then the majority of the people get poorer and poorer to the point where everybody reduces to a nothing standard of living. And in the process, there's no real mention of God at all. All the traditional values of God and family are destroyed. I mean, anyone who studied a communist nation would come away with the conclusion you'd never want to live in one unless you listen to the rhetoric.
Or unless you're one of the elites.
Right. Well, it's a great system for the elites. It's one of the best systems ever designed for a small group of people to steal everything for themselves, in the process bankrupting the country and the majority of the population. And the people who don't go along with it, you just kill. But
yeah,
these truths about what socialist and communist systems do are never taught in the schools.
Yes, I have never seen a lesson on the 56 million people that were exterminated after their guns were taken by just 5 of the communist regimes of the last 60 years.
Right.
We don't hear anything on that.
I mean, this again is part of the controlling of the education system and controlling of the message, while simultaneously people are dumbing down. I mean, I can assure you that public schools will be pushing and teaching the kindergartners a sexual agenda. And the public schools under a socialist system that Obama wants to create, they won't care if the kids can read or not, because if they can't read, they'll be more compliant voters.
Absolutely. The less educated the voter, the more compliant. Let's move to international. So we have Iran on the verge of a nuclear bomb. We have, in Paul Kenger's interview and Denisha's interview and your interview and my various shows to this audience, pretty conclusive proof, never mind in his words, but in his actions, which is what really counts, that he's not a huge fan of Israel. And, you can attribute any reason you want to that. I happen to ascribe to the colonial power theory. Tell us what you think about Barack Obama's pledge that Iran will never get the bomb.
Well, again, if you just watch what Obama's done and separate it from the rhetoric, Obama went to Cairo, and when he first took office in 2009, proclaimed that he'd experienced Islam in 3 continents, something he'd been denying throughout the primary and the election campaign of 2008, and then has embraced this Arab Spring. Now, the Arab Spring is a radical takeover, a breakdown of the traditional power structure, and Gaddafi, Mubarak, whatever you thought of these guys, they were still maintaining stable countries and were generally favorable to the West, maybe not all the time. Certainly Mubarak far more favorable to Israel and to the West. And the Arab Spring emphasized and gave power to the Muslim Brotherhood, which in country after country destabilized the government and produced chaos, which, was billed by Obama as a democratic movement. Well, democracy in the Middle East, the joke is you vote. Democracy is one time, one vote. It's not one man, one vote. It's one time, one vote. The moment the Muslim Brotherhood or the radicals take over, that's the end of voting. And you're seeing the struggle play out right now in Egypt, which is radicalized. You're seeing the struggle playing out in Syria. The truth has still not been told in Benghazi. We were gun running into the radical groups, terrorist groups, al-Qaeda groups that were opposing Gaddafi in Libya. Those guns and the radicals are now being sent via Turkey into Syria, again with the aid of our CIA and State Department. This is why there's all the lying going on about Benghazi. In the meantime, Iran has just been increasing its power, slowly making progress on nuclear weapons, intensifying its control in Iraq, and its influence continues to be strong in Syria. Its influence in Lebanon has grown dramatically, and Obama is, and with Egypt, now with the Muslim Brotherhood largely in control, you find open passages through the Sinai into the Gaza, which is being resupplied and with lots and lots of missiles. And the entire tinderbox nature of the Middle East has never been more precarious. This is what Obama has achieved, and I see nothing in the way which will stop Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. Even the sanctions we impose, we leave so many back doors. I published a series of articles last year on HSBC, the bank. There are so many banks laundering money and so many banks circumventing economic and other sanctions imposed on Iran that Iran has had easy access to sell its oil. It's maintained its economy. Despite
and listen, I mean, there's whole countries that have waivers on certain parts of the sanctions. I mean, Russia has waivers on parts of the sanctions, or it just ignores them. China, all the people, the great Russian reset that Obama tried to foist on us, obviously has not been a reset. And once again, everything works together, right? We don't have a reset with Russia. Russia grows stronger, we grow weaker. There's an equalization of nations at the table of nations because, I think in Obama's mind, we don't have the right to be sitting in the throne. And then that contributes to Iran, shall we say, rising, and that destabilizes the Middle East. That puts Israel, whom Obama doesn't like, in jeopardy. And it also threatens security for the United States, perhaps, this is my opinion, perhaps presenting another crisis down the road which Obama can take advantage of.
Well, and I also predicted even when I wrote The Abomination that Obama was going to unilaterally disarm a nuclear weapon, which he has been doing.
Yes, and most people don't know about that. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, Obama did a commercial where he said he basically thought we ought to be in a no-nukes environment, and the way to get there was for us to disarm. And he's systematically been reducing the number of nukes that the United States has and not renewing them with newer or better weapons, dismantling and not extending various missile shields into Europe, and has largely been putting the U.S. military into a very weakened position.
And all of this done with no quid pro quo whatsoever by our enemies.
No, and with Chuck Hagel now presiding over the military, I think you're going to see a rapid dismantling of the force that George W. Bush, going back to Ronald Reagan, assembled, which has been a quick response and a modern military which has been able to fight desert warfare, going back to the Gulf War. We're going to lose a lot of those cutting-edge capabilities. And the American military, including the Navy, is going to get reduced back to pre-World War I levels if Obama has his choice.
Not only that, I was just reading the other day, you talk about one of the ways to undermine a military, not only in terms of readiness through materials and supplies and monies and training, but, it's to undermine morale, which I think he's done a great job of. But I read an article the other day that they're actually proposing, I couldn't believe it, I had to read it twice, that high-level officers in the military will now be subjected to peer review and review by their subordinates, kind of like a professor is, at school.
Right.
The
agenda has been to introduce gays into the military. The whole effort of the major achievement of Obama across the board has been bringing a homosexual agenda into areas where it has never been before.
Which, during the election, he said he was against.
Well, of course, all this, when you hear policy evolving, his policy's evolving, that's all nonsense. Obama started out in support of all the the LGBT initiative. By the way, they've now taken the LGBT initiative, made it LGBTQ initiative. They've added queer onto the end of lesbian, bisexual, gay, transgender. I'm not sure what distinct queer adds to the equation, but I've noticed recently they've made this change.
And by the way, folks, just so you understand,
in the schools, that's in the military, that's in the courts with marriage. Before Obama, and I said this would happen too, before I wrote this in The Abomination, there'd be a great emphasis on the cultural issues and trying to desensitize people and as I point out, just to jump ahead a little bit, in the new book, the ACLU is now in court, supporting the pedophiles, the NAMBLA, the North American Man-Boy Love Association.
You're kidding?
That the ACLU is taking cases, pushing the pedophile agenda, saying that this is again another, once you break the barrier, and as I point out, you distinguish the Judeo-Christian ethic, in which sex is for procreation and is considered to be sacred, responsibility of raising children is part of that procreation. You say no, sex is just for pleasure. Well, then, you move into a relativistic ethics.
And any children you spawn aren't yours; they're the collective.
Handled by the collective. See, that's how that all fits together. And then, so why not? Why stop at same-sex marriage, pedophilia? I said my whole point in Bad Samaritans, the new book, is that we will now move into a form of paganism that has not been known since antiquity. And, once relativistically, anything the human mind can think of, that person can justify. Well, sure, since these are no longer aberrant behaviors, well then, bestiality. How about snuff films that are designed to produce sexual excitement, or certain forms of bizarre sadomasochism designed to produce sexual excitement? Why? They're all okay. I'll send you a literature. I'll send you, 25 treatises from the ancient world, just justifying pedophilia on it's part of the education of boys.
We're going to get into that right after a station ID, but I want to wrap up this international segment with North Korea and Iran.
Right.
And first of all, is it your belief that A, Barack Obama does not want Iran to get the bomb, B, Barack Obama really couldn't care less if they do or not, or C, he would really like to see them get it?
I'm sure he'd be happy if they got it. We're not taking steps to oppose it. And this has been in the agenda. I mean, the left has been on this agenda. We gave the nuclear material under Clinton to North Korea, which was insanity at the time, knowing who North Korea is. John Kerry proposed the same thing in 2004, running against George Bush, that we would give nuclear material to Iran to see what they would do with it. We've done nothing to block Iran. I fault George W. Bush on this as well, but at least George Bush made honest efforts diplomatically. I was deluded to think they would work. But Obama has no policy. Occasionally we do these half-hearted efforts to have negotiations in Geneva that we know are going to fail.
Well, I think his only assertive policy is blocking Israel's strike.
There's been a restraint on Israel. And the Jews feel fine that we provide our anti-missile shield. But, at some point or other, Netanyahu was at the UN when Netanyahu, reporting for WND, when he came with the bomb, and he said there's this red line here, which is the area where it becomes critical, and this is beyond this point, we can't stop them. Well, Israel's got to feel that they're right at that point now.
I agree.
Very close to it.
I agree.
And
on the North Korean question, Jerry, once again, I don't think it phases Barack Obama one iota that they have nuclear weapons, and I don't think, this is my personal opinion, that it would faze him much if they used them. Your opinion?
I agree. I think we're, though, about to have some testing of all of this. That the Obama's had a great deal of luck carried forward through, even with the economics deteriorating at the end of the Bush era. Bush put in place most of the steps that have been necessary to recover from that. And the problem is going to be, okay, now the initiatives on guns, the initiatives on immigration, the economy is at any point, the moment we stop printing money with quantitative easing, this economy will lose 1,000 points overnight in the stock market.
Absolutely. Not only that, interest rates will rise like a meteor, and the economy will grind to a halt. Everything is artificial.
Seeing 2 or 3 attacks like we've had in the Boston Marathon, if these repeat, you can forget gun legislation, you can forget immigration legislation. Obama has been riding on a wave of good luck. But I'd say that luck is not going to carry forever, and the disasters that are built into this system, are going to occur at one point or another. And, I've been cautioning people also, even with regard to the new book, that in the end, if you take a biblical point of view, well, God wins. I mean, I read the Bible, not a biblical scholar, but I can't find a single people that the Bible discusses where they poke their fingers in God's eyes and turn their back on God. And God says, that's just fine with me, I'll reward you.
No, that's not how the story goes.
The story is judgment of God, and you read what happens to these civilizations. Well, it amuses me no end when I watch the bombing occurs and, the tragedy, it's horrible, and that this kind of a violence can occur in Boston, the Marathon, and then I get amused. Barack Obama comes on and he wants to pray for these people. Where are you going to pray?
Yeah.
You can't pray in the public schools. You can't pray in the public square.
But on the other hand, he's reluctant to call it terrorism,
right?
Because that would besmirch his trumped-up anti-terrorism record. The workplace violence at Fort Hood and Benghazi kind of shuffled off to the side, et cetera, et cetera. Let me ask a question.
Saying, suddenly Barack Obama calls up and he wants to pray, and God's got to be enormously amused. And where have you been? You want to pray when you're in trouble?
He's been in Indonesia.
That doesn't help people.
We have about 7 minutes left. We're going to do a quick station ID. This is KGAB 650 AM Cheyenne and the Intermountain Network serving the Rocky Mountains, and 780 AM in Denver, and KFEZ Easy in Colorado Springs in northern New Mexico. This is Reid Lance Rosenthal on the right side with our really great guest that I've really been looking forward to interview, Dr. Jerome Corsi. And we're going to be back in just a moment, and then we're going to talk about how all this comes together in an attack on the most fundamental values that you hold dear and that you hope will be available for your children. We'll be right back.
400,000 readers have made the Threads West An American Saga series a #1 bestseller in 2011 and 2012. Threads West and Maps of Fate are the first 2 books of a 16-book tale of the adventure and romance of America, her people, her spirit, and the West, winning 8 major national awards including Best Western, Best Romance, and Best Historical Fiction. Author Reid Lance Rosenthal is a 4th-generation land and cattleman whose cowboy heart and poet's pen capture the spirit of the American landscape. His long-standing devotion to wild and remote places and to the people, both past and present, who leave their legend and footprint upon America and the American West, is the inspiration for all of his writing. Threads West, the first of the series, and Maps of Fate, Book 2, are available at all major bookstores, Hastings, Barnes & Noble, and on Amazon.com. Or go to threadswestseries.com. That's threadswestseries.com.
This is Reid Lance Rosenthal, back with you on the right side with Dr. Jerome Corsi. We've had a great discussion thus far on kind of Barack Obama's, shall we say, intentional plundering of this economy, what his goals are. I've tied it in for you to some other interviews that I've done with Dinesh D'Souza and Paul Kengor, and you should listen to those because they'll give you details. But we're going to finish up here with kind of the culmination. It ties into Jerry's new book, which I guess is just coming out this week. You can get it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, I'm sure a bunch of other places. Any other places you'd like people to go, Jerry?
WND Superstore, WND.com.
WNDSuperstore.com, WND.com, great. And this book is kind of focuses on the concentrated attack on one of the 3 pillars which the left must demolish, folks, to win: faith, family, and the Constitution. And the Constitution is dependent upon faith and family. Jerry's book is about the attack on faith, specifically, although not exclusively, by that great group we all know and love, the ACLU. Jerry, number one, where do they get funded? Where does the ACLU get their money?
ACLU gets money. They get contributions. There's a lot of leftist foundations that support them, everything from Ford Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, Peter Lewis Progressive Insurance. There's a lot of.
Is Soros also a contributor?
Soros. And then they also have they've perfected extortionism. I mean, they have learned how to collect legal fees. So they come into a community and they say, you better stop having the Boy Scouts recruit at the public schools, because the Boy Scouts won't accept gay scoutmasters. And the community, if they decide to fight it, ends up $250,000 poorer on their own lawyer fees, and then they pay $250,000 to the ACLU, the ACLU's lawyers' fees. The ACLU has gotten very good at being able to get a lot of money, millions and millions of dollars, by collecting on their victim.
Let me ask you a question. Give us 3 examples of the most recent, shall we say, examples of ACLU strategy in terms of tearing down religion, and, shall we say, tearing apart the fabric of religion in American lives.
Well, they've very quickly gotten it so you can't pray or have a nativity scene or anything in the public square that mentions God, and certainly nothing in the public schools. You can't. No football coach in a public school can say a prayer before a game. If a teacher puts a Bible on a desk in a public school, even if that Bible is used for personal prayer, that's objectionable. Or a third grader comes in with the Valentine, says Jesus loves me, they'll probably never graduate. I mean, these are the kinds of things that. And then the agenda, on the family and on issues dealing with the cultural wars, the ACLU is now not only going to support abortion and late-term abortion, but they're starting to support euthanasia. So, the idea of the death panels, well, yes, I'm sorry, Obamacare, you baby boomers, it's not cost-efficient for us to provide you all these medical services at the end of life, when the majority of people spend most of the money for medical care. So not cost-effective. You're going to die anyway. So we have euthanasia. How about we give you this package and you just die now? Save us all a lot of time and money.
Kind of like early retirement.
Early retirement.
Yeah.
And, it goes in the same with the wanting to do not only late-term abortions, which the ACLU is actively at right now, but even exploring the idea if the baby survives an abortion, but yet the mother wanted it dead. You've got the abortion doctor murder trials going on right now.
Hardly covered by mainstream media.
And what it involved, a lot of these cases involved infants that did survive and were killed anyway. And so the distinction, well, late term, what difference does it make? You're going to kill that baby, kill it anytime you want to kill it.
But these same people stand up and use the tragedy at Newtown as a reason for taking away gun rights, which,
of course,
which I would think, in my opinion, tell me if you disagree, this isn't about guns, this is about control.
Well, it's about disarming the American people.
Right,
and,
control.
That's control, yes.
The important part of this, and it doesn't matter, listeners, what you think about abortion or what you don't. Here's the key to it. The attack on faith, which undermines the family, we've been talking about it for almost the last hour, is all tied into an attack on the Constitution, that pesky document, that covenant of negative rights, as our president, who swore an oath to uphold it, calls it in his 2001 PBS interview. That is what stands, them and 130 million armed citizens, is what stands between them and victory as they see victory. I'm going to read a little thing from Jerry, and then we're going to finish up, because I thought this was a great quote out of your stuff. The protection and rights of the individual conceived as an eternal soul given life by a supreme being endowed with unalienable rights and governed by a code of natural right built into human consciousness by our Creator are the fundamental construct that drove our founding fathers to write the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. The ACLU, and I would add, although you didn't write this, the whole left side of the equation, understands correctly that attacking God is the only way the American people would ever permit these sacred documents to be so deeply rewritten as to subvert their original meaning. If the American people can be driven from believing in God, the consequence is that our rights are no longer unalienable, but instead our rights, such as they may be, are bestowed by a state that can as easily take away the rights as grant them in the first place. End quote. That's a brilliant paragraph. And I'm going to give you 30 seconds to wrap up, Jerry.
Well, that's what's happening. I think the ACLU from the Scopes monkey trial on in 1925 have tried to make it that God is only believed in by dumb people, uneducated. The educated, of course, are believing in rational science and materialistic science, which is, of course, the underpinning of communism.
And everybody else clings bitterly to their guns and religion.
Precisely, because we're all stupid and we're all backward. Well, the truth is, science continues to advance and affirm God. I mean, the most current idea of the creation of the universe, the Big Bang Theory, sounds an awfully lot like Genesis and God saying, "Let there be light." The top scientists will tell you, that much of what their work does affirms God, but yet the ACLU presents science it's godless.
And the reason that they present science that's godless, folks, is not because they have anything against God. They have something against the Constitution, and God has to go away from your mind and your life for them to tear down the Constitution.
Well, once especially the Judeo-Christian tradition, because once that's gone, you eliminate natural right. Once natural right is eliminated, then any standard will go.
That's right, and that's left up to the state, the elites.
Or by evolution, it's left up to chance. So all this sexual experimentation, who knows? Maybe we encounter the variation, the triple threesome upside down with giraffes that leads to the next stage of your evolution because it produces the variation that is successful in the great natural selection process. It's all nonsense. And even Darwin understood that it was nonsense.
We are unfortunately out of time. I want to have you back on because there's a whole bunch of subjects we didn't even get to, and I have always found your work fascinating, even though I don't agree with all of it. But the stuff we talked about today, you and I are in lockstep, and I hope folks listen to another voice other than mine and some of the other folks I've had on this show. So thank you very much for being interviewed, and I will look forward to our next confab together.
Thanks, Reid. Appreciate it very much.
I hope you enjoyed that interview. Dr. Jerome Corsi is really quite a guy and very, very controversial. In fact, the subjects we talked about today are the least controversial of the subjects that he's written about and proclaims about, believe it or not. But we're going to have him back. And I just wanted to remind you, the last two shows have really caused quite a furor. I mean, amazing. If you haven't listened to him, you should, because it is a barrage, a staccato, a machine gun of facts. The show 2 weeks ago being kind of over the last 20-ish years, and they're irrefutable. I give you the sites. You check it out. And the last show, last week, being really in the last 60 days. Kind of some hair-raising stuff, including some things which have come to light about what they have planned, and Jerry talked about it today, for the education for your kids, and what they've been doing, by the way, for the last 30 years. All part of a plan, absolutely irrefutable. You need to know if you have kids, you're going to have kids, or, even if your kids are through school, might explain some things for you. And I have a series of interviews coming up over the next few weeks, folks. Some surprise names, you've heard them. Also, I'm going to be having Stuart Rhodes, founder of the Oath Keepers, back on, particularly now that your Colorado sheriffs are standing up to this gun law, honoring their oath to the Constitution, which is what the Oath Keepers are about. And everybody seemed to really like his interview. It's one of my favorites, actually. We're going to have Jerome Corsi back in the next month. We're going to have George Euclix, the high mucky muck from the European Central Bank, and he's going to advise you specifically on some personal investments and protections that you should be taking. So don't miss that show, because I'm looking forward to myself. You don't often get to tap into a mind like that. And we got all sorts of other fun stuff, and I'm actually going to do a show, believe it or not, and I'm going to give you what I think are the solutions to all these problems. You keep hearing about problems from me, and I'm raising the flag and swinging the lantern, Paul Revere of radio, whatever. Let me tell you what I think about on the solution side. I think you might like it. That show will be coming up very soon again, and a show on education, which a number of you listeners have asked for. I'm working on some great guests for that, and that'll set your hair on fire, I guarantee you, if you have kids. Anyway, this is Reid Lance Rosenthal. You have a great Saturday, a great week, and we'll see you in 7 days.
For more information about Reid and his work, please go to ontherightsideradio.com. There you can also click to purchase the first 2 volumes of his #1 best-selling historical Western series, Threads West, An American Saga, and Maps of Fate. And now the first volume of his new nonfiction series, Land for Love and Money, is available everywhere, or go to landforloveandmoney.com. That's Land for Love and Money. We'd also like to remind you that if you've missed any shows, you can go to the show archives on Reid's ontherightsideradio.com webpage. We look forward to seeing you again next week for another episode of Reid Lance Rosenthal, On the Right Side.